Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. This is part 4 of the Build a Shopify app series where we've been going through and building a product updater app together. And this is actually going to be the final part of the series, the last video. So we're going to go through the back end, finish up the front end, and hook it all together. And by the end of it, we're going to come out with an app that is actually, somewhat useful, and you can update products and everything right from the app. So it's going to be a lot of fun. If you have not seen the other parts, I'll put links in the description. Please go check those out first. I'm starting off just right where part 3 left off, code-wise and everything. So go check those out first if you have not. I'm excited to get started, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So this is where we left off in the last video. We basically had set up the product card down here with the image, the title, and description fields, and they don't actually do anything yet. We haven't hooked anything up. None of these buttons are hooked up. So there's still quite a bit to do, but let's go ahead and get started with it. The first thing we're going to do, because we did set up our endpoint in the last video to actually fetch the products of the store with a simple query. But other than that, we haven't formatted it. And I think we're not even sending it to the front end yet. So let's go ahead and do that one first. So we're going to go into index.js under the web folder, which this file is just the main server file. We're going to come down to /API/products, which is the endpoint we set up, I think 2 videos ago, or the last one, where we're just fetching those products. So we're going to make some edits to this fetch products.js file. And I actually, for this one, I'm just going to paste the code in and then go through it line by line, just to save us a little bit of time since there's a lot to cover today. But you can go on our GitHub, on the repo, and you can find this exact file so you can follow along with me. I'm also going to put a link in the description to this exact file, so you can go right to it. So the first thing that we've changed here is in the query, the fetch products query. Before, I think we were just getting the title, so now we've updated it quite a bit. So we're getting the ID, of course, and then we're also getting description, title. The legacy resource ID it's optional, but it just will make another step easier in the future. So we're bringing that in. We're getting the images, just the first image for each product. And if you remember from one of the previous videos, this is a connection, which means we need to, it's basically like an array of image objects in this case, or for variants, it's basically an array of variants, where in GraphQL it's edges. So we need to specify how many we want. Here we're saying we just want the first image, and then down here we can specify which fields we want under the node. So we're just getting the first image, and we're only getting the URL of that image returned. Same thing with the variants down here. We want the first 10 variants, and then we are getting the ID, price, and title for each one of those variants. Coming down further, we have the format GQL response function, which this one, all it's doing is taking in the data from GraphQL, the GraphQL response, which is a little bit harder to work with if you were to send it just straight to the front end. So I like to just format it here on the server before sending it over to make everything easier on the front end. So all we're doing here is just getting the edges, which again, it's just basically edges is just like an array holding all of the node objects, they're called, but basically a node object is just a data object. So in this case, edges is going to be an array holding our product objects. So we'll come down here, and all I'm doing is mapping over the edges and just returning a new array, just a little bit formatted a little nicer. So we've got the ID, legacy ID, basically all the same ones we were fetching up here. For the image, we're using the URL if there is a URL. If there's not, then I've got just a default image here. And then for the variants, same thing. We're just mapping over the edges and returning formatted objects there. So, and that's all that function is doing. So come down here to the fetch products function, which is the main exported function of this file. And you can see we're, just like in the other endpoint, we're creating the GraphQL client using the session that's passed in here. and then we are executing that query and passing in, of course, the query that we created. So this right here, this response is the raw GraphQL response. And we're taking that, throwing it into our format function, and then we're returning the value of whatever this function returns, which is just a formatted array of product objects. So that's all it's doing here. We've got some error handling down here. All right, so now let's go ahead and use this endpoint in our front end so we can actually start working with real data. And then just a reminder that this is actually the API/products endpoint that we're working with, where we're calling that fetch products function. So on our front end, we're going to hit this endpoint in order to get all that data sent back. So if you go to the front end folder under web, open that up, then let's go to pages and index.jsx. So this is the main page, basically the home page. Like it says here, it's the home page of the front end. And let's add in that query here where we hit our endpoint. And we're going to use a hook that Shopify actually provides here in the template. It's called use app query. And it just makes it a bit easier to query our backend, which we want to do in this case. So this is what that looks like. Use app query, and it'll automatically import it for us, but it's just in that hooks directory. And then all you pass into here is an options object, and here we just need the URL prop in that object. And we want to hit /API/products. So I'm returning the data prop from this use app query hook. But there are a few other things. There are a lot of other things actually you can return from here. And we're actually going to bring in a few. One is loading. There's refetch, and then is refetching is what we want to bring in. And this, if you're familiar with the React query library, that's what this is using under the hood. And so it brings in a lot of other options, not just the data. It doesn't just return the data, but obviously is loading. So we can check this, and it'll tell us whether the initial fetch of data is happening. There's a refetch function, so we could just call this wherever we want to refetch the data, hit the endpoint again, and then another flag that tells us if it's currently refetching. So really useful, and we're actually going to be using I think all of these, so we'll leave those there, and we'll be pulling them into our some of our components later on. So now we're just going to add a console.log and log out this data real quick so we can see it in the front end and make sure that it's coming through correctly. So now let's go back over here. We'll open up the console, and let's put that on the right side so we can see it. So there's our data log. We open it up. It's an object with a products prop. If you open that up, this is our array of products that was returned from our endpoint. Again, we took the raw GraphQL response and shoved it through that formatting function. And so this is what the formatting function did. It formatted all these product objects nicely for us. So we've got description, ID, image, title, and the variants for each one of these products, which is exactly what we want. All right, so now we're going to set up our product card to actually use the live data here. So let's come in here and let's remove this title bar just to make it a little cleaner, and we'll add a title to the page component. I just prefer to do it that way, so it looks like this. This will be gone once we refresh. That's what the title bar looked like. I prefer the look of just having a title on the page. So we'll make that little change. And then now let's go into product card. So we have the data here. Let's go into product card. It's going to accept props for now, and we'll go ahead and split that up later. But for now, let's set the image source to props.image, and then the value of the text field for the title equal to props.title, and then the value for the description field equal to props.description. Okay, So, okay, so now it's empty. We need to pass in the actual data here. So let's go ahead and we're just going to do the first product in the product list. So just render one product card for that first product. So we'll do data dot products, and we'll just grab the first one, and then we'll destructure that. So it just passes in all these, the props of the first product directly into the product card. So we save, come over here, and it's pulling in the image, the title, and the description for this first product. Don't mind the weird names. I was testing it earlier. Okay, so that is set up. So now that we know that it's working, that we can actually render the product card with the data, let's go ahead and set up a component that will render each of the product cards out in a list. So for all of the products that are coming back from the response. So for that one, let's create a new component under the components directory, and let's call it product list.jsx. And then let's see. So we know we're going to be using the product card. So let's import product card from this directory here. And then let's create the actual function, product list. And I did this backwards. Should be export const product list. And then let's go ahead and set up. Let's see. So we want to pass in the data into this component, and we're actually going to pass in a few of these props. So let's pass in data for sure, and let's pass in is loading and is refetching as well. So we'll come in here. We're going to have data is loading and is refetching, and then we can display a different state based on if we have the data, if it's initially loading, or if it's refetching now. So first thing, if it's loading or if it's refetching, then let's just show a spinner. So we'll create a layout component and then just put a spinner in it. And these are all from Polaris. You can see they're being auto imported from Polaris. If you remember, pretty much any content that you put, that's like a block of content you want to put inside of a layout component. So we're putting in the layout with a spinner, and that'll only show if it's loading or if the data is refetching. So basically, if the current data we have doesn't exist, or if it's not up to date, then we'll show a spinner. So if neither of these are true, meaning the data actually exists, then we can return a layout down here. And what we want to do is, if there are products, then we're going to display the cards. If there are no products, then we're going to show an empty state. So first, we'll just say if data.products.length, meaning if there are any products at all, then we are going to map over each of those products. So we'll do data.products.map. And for each product, we're going to render a layout section. And then within that layout section, let's add that for now, just to get rid of the error. Within each layout section, we're just going to render a product card. And we're going to pass in the product. All right, so what this is doing, what we just set up here, we're checking if there are products in the products array. If there are, then we're going to map over each product and render a new product card and pass in all of the product props, which right now we're only using the image, title, and description. So that'll be passed in and rendered correctly. And then if there are no images or are no products, then we're going to render, again, a layout.section. And then we're going to use an empty state here. And well, we're going to put it in the card actually. So we'll do card, and then we'll do empty state. And again, these are all Polaris components. Pretty much like 90% of what we're writing on the front end is pure just Polaris components. So the card, then the empty state. And for the empty state, you can look in the documentation for all of these. They're all pretty straightforward, and the props are well defined in the documentation. But for the empty state, we're going to add in a heading prop, and we'll just say no products found. And then we can also add an image property to display in there. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute by the empty state. We'll render that and check it out. And I've got an image here for this empty state that I'm going to paste in here. And then within the empty state, you can add a message. So let's just add a p tag that just says add products using the card above. Because if you remember right here, this is the card that we set up in the last video where you can actually click it to product to populate 5 random products with random titles, description, and images. Okay, so let's save that. And that looks good. Okay, so if we go back, well, first we need to render it here, but once we render it here, we should be able to see it in the app. So we'll render product list. We'll pass in the props it's expecting, which are data, is loading, and is refetching. And we're just passing those directly from this use app query hook. So is loading. Okay, awesome. So is loading and is refetching. That should be everything we need to render this correctly. So let's save and go see if that's working. And it looks like it is rendering those correctly. So it took the 10 products returned from the API, and now it's rendering a card for each of those with the image, title, and description in there for now. And then just to show you what the other states look like, so you can see what the spinner looks like. Let's just change this to true for now. You can see the spinner. I mean, we can add a padding or a margin on the top to make it look a little better, but that's the spinner. We'll revert that. And then let's go ahead and change this to false so that it'll always render the empty state. And okay, we need to import the card from Polaris. There we go. So that's what that looks like. So yeah, it's pretty neat. Like with really minimal code. I mean, this is 30 lines of code, and we're able to render out multiple states. You know, if there's no data, we're just showing the empty state. We're either showing a spinner or we're just showing I need to actually set this back up. Or we're just showing the actual products. So all of that in 30 lines of code with Polaris. So Polaris, it's a really great library, really speeds up development time and the whole process and makes everything look good, meshes with the Shopify UI. So all around, it's a really great library, saves a ton of time, and that's why 90% of our front end is going to be Polaris. So right now, our fields are not editable. They're just rendering the data coming directly from the product. So the first thing we're going to do is update these fields to be editable so we can actually make changes to it. And to do that, we're just going to add some state props in here, because right now you can see it's just grabbing that default value, and there's no on-change handlers or anything to handle any changes or edits there. So we're going to add some state variables. Let's add title and set title, use state, and we'll set the default value of that to props.title. And then we'll add the same thing for the description and set it to props.description. And that's all we need for now. The image isn't going to change, so we can just use props.image. And then we're going to change these to just use our state variables. And now we can add an on-change handler to these text fields. And the on-change handler for the text field, it just returns the updated value for the text field. It doesn't return like an event or anything like that, so you don't have to do e.target.value or anything. It's just passing in the exact value, so we can actually use a shorthand here and just pass in the setter. So just like that, set title. And same thing here with the description. We'll just pass in set description. Okay, so just with that, we should be able to come back And yeah, so we're able to update the fields now. They're editable, which is what we want. We don't have these hooked up yet, so we can't actually hit a button and update the products. But the next thing we're going to render is the variance table that'll show just below here in a collapsible. So let's add a button here first that'll allow the user to toggle the variance table. So we'll add that in product card.jsx, and it's going to go within this form layout. So right underneath the two text fields that we just edited, we'll go ahead and add a button. And let's change that, or add the text, button text of show variance. Or let's do show variance. And so if we save, that's what that looks like. By putting it in the form layout here, form layout will do some auto formatting for us, so we don't have to worry about adding more padding or margin or anything. It's formatting it pretty nice to fit in with the rest of the form. So now that we have the button here, let's go ahead and actually set up the variance table. If you remember, in one of the past videos I showed a preview of what it'll look like, and I'll probably put one on the screen here, but it's just a collapsible table where it just shows the variant product or the price and the title of the variant. So we're gonna create that table now. And to do that, we're going to create a new component in the components directory, and we're just going to call it variance.jsx and export const variance. Okay, so the first things that we know we're going to pass into here in props passing into this variance component is, of course, the variance that we want to render, and this will come directly from that product object. If you remember right in here, this is the product object, and hopefully you can see that. This is the product object, and it has the variance array directly on it. So we'll be able to get those very easily and just pass them in. And then as far as what we're going to render a card component from Polaris. Let's add the sectioned prop, which the section prop, all it does is add some padding all the way around the card, makes it look a little bit better. And then we'll add a title and call it variance. From most of the examples I've seen, when there's an index table or a data table, they're typically inside of a card just because it looks quite a bit better. It gives it just kind of a container to live in. And you'll be able to see that in just a second when we render this out. So now we're going to add in the index table component from Polaris. And this is very versatile. There's a ton of different ways you can configure it, a lot of different props, but we're going to add basically the bare minimum here just to render the table and get it to do what we want to do. So first, it takes a prop of item count, and I believe this is required, and in this case it's just variance.length. Then resource name. So let me build this out and then I'll explain it. Singular variant, plural variance. So what this is used for is, for example, if there's an empty state on the table, there's no items to populate it with, then it'll populate some text for us and say there are no variants or something. So that's why it is able to use whatever these terms are we define to kind of build those messages for us. So there's resource name. The next one we're going to add is headings, and this is just an array of objects that take the title. And I believe there are a few other things you can add into these objects, but all we need for now is the title property for each of these objects. So we're going to pass in, or we've got one column that'll be variant, and the next column will be price. Okay, and just the very last one, we're just going to set selectable equal to false, since we don't want them to be able to select any of the rows, since we don't need it. So we'll save that. And then within the index table, similar to like an HTML table, there's rows and cells. And what we're going to do here is basically just render a table row for each variant. And then within that row, there will be cells that correspond to these headings. So the variant and price. So let's come in here and we'll add in index table dot row. And actually we want to render one of these for each of the variants. So before we do that, we're going to map over the variants. And okay, so just like that, we're going to map over each of the variants. We're going to render a table row. And within the table row, we're going to add an index table.cell component. And in this one, it's going to be, the first table cell is going to be just the variant title or the variant name. So let's put that in a text field to make it look a little bit nicer. And this one will have a value of variant.title. For the title, we're not going to allow any edits to the title just because it introduces a couple other cases that we need to account for. So for now, we're just going to disable it and make it non-editable. So we're going to add the disabled prop, and then just to be safe, we're going to add the read-only prop as well. Let's add a label of variant, and then we're going to add the label hidden prop. So we don't want the actual label of the text field to show, but we want to add the label along with the label hidden prop just for accessibility reasons and for screen readers and such. So it's still in there. It's a good practice to put them in either way. So that's the first cell. And now we're going to add in another cell for the price. Again, within a text field, since this one is going to be editable. So we'll set this one with a value of variant.price for now. This one, again, we're going to add a label of price and then just add the label hidden tag or prop. Okay, so that's what that looks like. Again, just kind of going over it real quick. We have a card. Inside of the card, we're rendering an index table. And then within the index table, for each variant of the product, we're going to render an entire row with two cells. The first one being the variant title. Second one is the variant price. And we're actually going to add two more props here that I forgot about. We're going to add the type to restrict it to an input type of number. And then we can actually add a prefix here. And we're just going to set it to a $sign. So this is obviously USD currency, but this will just prefix that symbol onto the field. So now that we have our index table set up with the variants, we're going to actually render this in our product card under a collapsible. So let's go back to product card.jsx, and below our button, we'll just add a new collapsible component, again, Polaris. And then within that, we can render our variance component. And the collapsible component takes an open prop that will just indicate whether to show the collapsible or to hide it. And so we're going to hook that up real quick just with a new state variable to show the variance, and then we'll set this button up to toggle it back and forth as well. So we'll come in here, we'll just call it show variance, set show variance, and then we'll set it to false by default, so it's hidden when it first renders. We'll set the open prop to show variance, and then we just need to set up this button so that the onClick handler will just toggle that show variance variable back and forth. So we'll do set show variance, and that's just a quick way to do a toggle. You just take the previous value for a Boolean, at least. If it's a Boolean toggle, just take the previous value and flip it, negate it, basically. And then I almost forgot, but we actually need to pass in the variance into here, and we'll just set it equal to props.variance. And now we should be able to save and render that. So when we click show variance, it'll expand that table. And there we go. That's, again, with pretty minimal code in this variance component, again, like around, just under 40 lines of code. We have an index table, row, cell, and everything. And with just that amount of code, we can render a pretty good looking UI using Polaris. Now, the next thing we want to do is make sure that these fields are editable, because again, we're just setting the value. We don't have an on-change handler yet for these, so nothing's happening right now when you click on them. So to do that, in product card.jsx, we're going to add in another state variable called variance. And the default state of that one will just be props.variance. And let's change this now to use that state variable so it's updated. And now what we need to do is add an on-change handler to this price text field so that it will find the variable that we're updating, or the variant that we're updating, and it'll return basically an updated variance array with that single variant updated. So to show, let's add in a new function here. Since this is an array of objects, it's a little bit trickier. We can't just update a single value like we did for these. We have to set up basically a handler that'll go through, find the variant that we want to update it, and update that without affecting all the other ones. So we're going to create a new function called const update variable, or variant. I keep saying that. And then on this one, we're going to set it up to accept an ID, which is the ID of the variant that we want to update, and then the price, which is the updated price. So for this one, we want to call set variance, and the first parameter of the setter function is the previous value, meaning the current variance array in state. So we're going to use that, and let's create a new updated array right here, updated variance. And what we're going to do is we're just going to map over the previous array, and we're going to check if the ID that we passed in here matches the variant ID that we're currently looping over. And if that's true, then we know that we need to update the price for this specific variant. So we're going to return all of the other fields for the variant, because those we want to keep unchanged. And then we'll just add in the price and update that just like that. And if there is no match, then we just want to return the variant unchanged. And now to close out this call to set variance, we just want to return our new updated variance array. And again, what we're returning will be the same variance array as before, except it'll have the single variant updated with the updated price and everything. So that is the handler. Let's change that, actually update variant. So now we need to pass in that handler to the variance component so we can use it on the price field. So we'll just call it update variant. And inside of here, we'll accept it. And on the price text field, we're going to set up the onChange to call that new function. So like I said, this price parameter passed into this onChange function is just the updated price. So knowing that, we can call our new update variant function that we're getting through the props. And we'll pass in the variant.id. And then the second parameter will be this updated price that we want to update the variant to. So we can save that, and then let's go check out on our app and make sure that we can edit that. And there we go. The function is working as expected. The single variant we want to update is being updated. All right, so now we have most of the UI done. The fields are editable. We're bringing in the live data here. And so now we need to hook up these buttons to actually work so we can actually update the product that we're editing. So the first thing we need to do is set up the actual update endpoint in the server, because right now we don't have anything like that set up. So we'll go back to index.js under the web directory. In other words, it's just our main server file. So we can come down, and this is the endpoint we set up previously, the product/create. And we're going to add a new endpoint under here, actually under this express.json middleware. And we're actually just going to copy this endpoint and then paste it down here, just again to save a little bit of time. And this new endpoint, we're going to call it product/update. It's going to be a post endpoint. Update this. And instead of this product creator helper we're going to create a new helper called product updater, and we're going to call that from this endpoint. So let's create a new file under helpers. We're going to call it product updater.js. And for this one, this is another one where I'm going to paste in the code just because it'll save us a bit of time. And then I'm going to go through and basically explain every part of it. So this is what it looks like. Instead of a query, like last time, we're doing a mutation, which is just in GraphQL means that basically you're going to change something. Query is just you're getting data. Mutation is you're updating data in some way. So we have this update product mutation. And basically what we're doing is we're passing into it a product to update. And these are the fields. Under here, we specify the fields that we want to update. So here we're passing in the ID because just so it knows which product to update. We're going to update the description, which it's actually, the field is actually description HTML. We're going to update the title and then the variance. And notice the syntax here. Again, we're specifying first 10, and then we're specifying the fields that we want to update, meaning ID and price. So now if we come down here into the product updater function, we're still passing in the session as the first parameter, and then we're actually passing in the data directly to this function, ID, description, title, variance. And these are the edited fields that we're passing directly from our front end. We're creating the GraphQL client just like in the other endpoint. And then here, where it's actually calling the client, we are passing in this update product mutation in the query field. And then we're passing in variables. And that's how the mutation knows what it is that we want. You can see the syntax here where we're passing in an input. And it's basically just all the variables that we're passing in right here. So we're passing in the updated description, title, and variance along with the ID of the product. And something important to note is that this is not a scalable way to update variance of a product, just because if you update it this way, and say you had 20, 30, basically any amount of variance more than 10, then it will add or update these variants to the product, but it'll delete the rest, so it won't carry over. So for that reason, there are a couple other mutations you can call to update variants specifically. I think there's a bulk update product variance, and that would be a much preferred way to doing this. But since all of our products have less than 10 variants, and this is just kind of a test app, this will work for now. But that's just something to keep in mind that you'll want to change later on if you're working with something like this with product variants. So now that we have this endpoint set up, or this helper function, let's go back into our server file index.js, and where we set up this endpoint product/update, let's go ahead and change this to be product updater. And then we're still passing in the session. And then for the second parameter, we're just going to pass in rec.body. And that'll have all of the fields already attached to it and ready to be passed into this helper function. So now that we have our endpoint set up, let's go ahead and go to the front end and call this endpoint and make sure that everything's working as expected. So we will go back to product card.jsx. We'll come to the top of the component here, and we're going to do this a little differently. To fetch the data, we used the use app query hook right here. We're going to use another hook that Shopify provides for us again in this hooks directory. It's called use authenticated fetch. And the reason why I'm going to use this, just to show you that there's different ways to do things. You could use app query here, but you could also just use authenticated fetch directly. which use app query actually uses this other hook. So it's just kind of another layer of abstraction, makes it a little bit easier. But just to show you what that looks like, we're going to go into product card. And if you're familiar with the fetch using just the browser fetch, then that's pretty much exactly what we're doing here. We're setting it up so we can use that. So we'll create a new variable called fetch, and then we're going to call that use authenticated fetch hook and call that. And what this will return is just a function that we can use. We've called it fetch here, so it'll work just like a browser fetch. You just call fetch, you pass in the endpoint, pass in any headers you want, and then it'll call whatever endpoint on our server. I would say you'll always be using either use app query or use authenticated fetch at the very least, because these hooks automatically add the security and authorization headers and everything needed to call your Shopify backend. So it just makes it much, much easier. You could do it yourself if you wanted, and go a little bit deeper into that, but this works great and it works out of the box and it just makes things a lot more convenient. So now that we have our fetch function, let's set up a update handler that will then call the fetch function, hit our endpoint, and pass in all the data that we need. So we'll call this one on update. It's going to be async, and then we're going to do, let's just format our updated product to make it a bit more clear what we're doing. So we'll create an updated product variable. And here, pretty straightforward, we're just going to pass in title, description, and variance, since those are the fields that we're updating. And then we're going to pass in the ID as well, which is props.id. And if you remember the helper function that we just barely set up, the product updater actually is expecting these ID, description, title, variance. So we are passing, this will be passed into the body of that post request directly. So it's just easier to set it up like this, and then we can pass it in directly. So now we're going to call this fetch function. We'll do const response equals fetch. First parameter will be our endpoint, which is API/products/update. Then the second parameter is an options object. And there's actually a couple headers that we're going to add here. Well, the first thing we're going to do is set the method, which is post. And then we're going to add some headers just to make sure that it works correctly and that the server knows what it is expecting. Because here we're passing in JSON, so we're going to let the server know that that's what we're passing through. Application/JSON for the accept. And then we're going to pass the content type header of application.json or /JSON, same thing. So now the last thing we need to do is just add the body property, which is going to be a stringified version of this updated product. So we'll do json.stringify updated product. Okay, so now, and we'll await that. Now this response it'll just return the response. It'll have a prop on it called OK, meaning if it returns a successful response. So in that case, we'll just log out success for now if it was successful. And now that we have this, just making sure it looks good. Okay, so now we can call this on update function from our primary footer action, which is this button, update product. So we'll come on here, we'll replace the on action with our on update function. And real quick, let's actually set up our view and admin button so we can open it up in a new tab and verify that it actually is updating the product. And this is going to use a hook from AppBridge, which is a Shopify provided library for working within the admin UI for embedded apps. So we're going to import a hook called useNavigate from AppBridge React. And we'll set that equal to a variable called navigate, useNavigate. Okay, so now with this function called navigate, we can use that to easily move between pages in the admin. So specifically, if we want to go to a product page, then this navigate function will make it much easier for us to go directly to where we need to go within the admin. So let's set it up just directly on here. So on the on action, we'll actually call the navigate function, and then I'm just going to write this out and then I will explain what's going on. But again, it's a navigate function. The first prop is an object. We'll do name equals product, resource ID props.legacy ID. And then we'll do another object with target new. Okay, so what this is doing here, the first prop is an options object where we can pass in the name, which is referring to the name of the resource. In this case, it's product. So if you wanted to open up, say, like an order page, then this would be name order. And then the resource is an object which takes the ID of whatever it is that we're passing through. So in this case, we have specified that we want to open up a product, and then with the resource prop, we can specify exactly which product ID we want to open. And then for the second parameter of this navigate function, we're just passing in target new, which just specifies that we want to open it up in a new tab. And there are a couple other options you can add in here. You can look at the docs. That's how you're going to get through the majority of this, is having the Polaris documentation pulled up, going through, checking out all the props for all the components. And then for things like navigation, of course, then app bridge documentation comes in handy very well. So now that we have this hooked up, we can go ahead and test it in our app. We can test both of these buttons to make sure it works. So let's come over here and, okay, so this is the unedited text right now. So let's come here to this hidden Dawn product. We'll click this button and it'll open it in a new tab. Takes a second to load, but it will load, hopefully. All right, so I just had to restart my app for some reason, but we're back. And okay, so now we can test the view and admin button. Open that up, and it just opens up the product in a new tab as expected here. We can see the variant pricing and everything. So now I'm going to update it from here. And let's just call it test. Very original, I know. And then for this one, let's set the first variant to $10. And right now it's 20. So we click update. We should see a success log here. Okay, and now if you come back over here and refresh, we should see that the text description and variant has been updated. So looks like the endpoint's working as expected. We're able to come in here, make the changes, and yeah, everything looks like it's working really good. So this really is the core functionality of this little app we built, but we can take just a few more minutes and make the experience a whole lot better for the user by adding in a little toast pop-up when the product has been updated, and then maybe just a quick loading state. So let's make those changes real quick, just to show you, how quickly you can enhance the user experience, again, using just pre-built Polaris components. So let's go to the Shopify Polaris documentation, and let's go to components, and then let's go to the toast component right here. This is what it looks like if you haven't seen it. Just a little pop-up. Looks really nice. So we're going to copy these two, this function and this variable here, from the example down below. And let's just paste it in our product card. Yeah, product card component. So we'll put that up here. And let's change this to toggle toast, just so it's a little more clear what we're doing. We will need a state variable to know whether to show the toast or not. So we'll do const show toast, set show toast. And of course, false by default. So we'll change this to set show toast. And let's update this on dismiss to do the toggle toast function. We'll update the content to say product updated. And then instead of active, it should be show toast. All right, so now this is the function that we'll call whenever we want to show the toast, to toggle it, show the pop-up. And then this is just the markup, basically the component. We could just take this directly and put it directly down here, but just easier to follow their example. So we'll copy this toast markup and we'll put it down here into the actual JSX. And let's create a fragment here so we can put the toast in, and got to put those there. And then we'll just put everything inside of this fragment here. Okay. You can put this toast markup anywhere. It doesn't have to be at the bottom of the rendering JSX, but I like putting it there, just keep it out of the way. Okay, so now we need to actually call the function to show the toast. So let's do that instead of where we log success right here in the onUpdate function, we're going to just call that toggle toast function to let them know that the product was updated successfully. And let's test that one real quick. I think I got everything. So we'll go back and looks like there's something. Okay, so use callback is not defined. So we just need to make sure that we're importing that from React. Let's see. Okay, looks good. All right, so now if I make a change and update, is there something else? Okay, toast is not defined. Okay, let's make sure that we're importing that. Okay, now I think I got everything. Let's try it again. Error messages, very useful. Okay, test. Again, another error, okay. Let's see what's going on. Toast, so something with the toast. Okay, no frame context was provided. So this is an app bridge thing. Let me see. All right, so the issue that we were seeing here where it was saying frame context or no context found, no frame context was provided. When you import toast from the Polaris library, then you have to wrap it in a frame or make sure that it's somewhere within a frame so that it has the context for the admin UI. But there's actually another place where you can import a toast component, and it's from app bridge, which is actually what I usually do, which is why we saw that error. So if you import the toast from the same place where you're importing use navigate, then it should work without needing to import or wrap it in a frame. So let's try that again. There we go. Okay, so the product updated toast appeared. So yeah, there are a few components where you can either import them from Polaris or from app bridge. Like there's also a modal component which you can import from either Polaris or app bridge. There are a few differences between them, and you can look through the docs and find those. But I typically prefer using the app bridge component for those few, like for the toast and if it's a simple modal, just because app bridge is kind of designed to work with your app and the admin UI as a whole. So, but you can really use it from anywhere. You just have to make sure that you're using the right prerequisites, basically. In this case, for Polaris, it needs to have a frame. So for the last part of this, we're just going to add a loading state. Again, just to enhance the experience a little bit. So we'll come in here in product card.jsx, and we'll add a new state variable called isUpdating, and set isUpdating. Use state default to false. We will, in the onUpdate function, we'll call set isUpdating, set it to true. And then once everything runs, everything has been updated, then we will change that back to false. Okay, so now we have our loading state set. So now what we want to do is just disable these fields if it is updating, so you can't come in here and make certain edits. And then we'll go ahead and change the text of the button to let the user know that we're actually updating right now. So we'll come in here. First thing, we'll just set the disabled prop on the text fields, and we'll just set it to is updating. Same thing here. And then to disable the variants, we just need to pass that prop into here, so we can actually access it on the price fields under the variants component. So we'll come in here and add the disabled prop, set it to is updating, and yeah, we need to make sure we're accepting it up here. So is updating. And now let's update the text of the button. So right now it just says update product. So if it's currently updating, let's set the text to updating ... Spelled that wrong. Okay. So now if it's updating, this will say updating ... Otherwise it'll show update product. And just for good measure, let's disable this button as well. So there's same thing with the other fields. This primary footer action, which really is a button, has a disabled prop. So same thing, we'll set that to is updating. Okay, and that should be everything we need. So let's go back and test that. Make some random edits. So now when we click update product, these fields should all be disabled, and this button should be disabled with the text change as well. And there we go. And the toast. Okay, so again, just another 10 minutes, and we were able to enhance the experience quite a bit, add a toast, add some loading states. So this is far from a polished application, not production ready by any means, but it's honestly a great starting point for those new to Shopify app development, so you can start seeing how the different parts fit together. So there's a lot of things that you could take on this and improve and turn it into something that is actually really useful for merchants. And I will have the finished code for this updated on my repo. I'll link it in the description. And then this code will be on a part 4 branch. So just a reminder, all of the videos in the series have their own branch on that repo, where you can find the completed code for that video. So like I said, this is a really great starting point as an application, so you can start seeing how things work together. And in upcoming videos, I'm going to be covering other important things like submitting an app to the App Store, hosting your Shopify app, setting up billing plans so you can start charging for your app, and a lot of other topics. So if you have any other topics you want to request, or questions you have, again, leave them in the comments down below or send me an email. I really do appreciate all the support and encouragement from everyone so far from when I started this series, and I'm super happy to see that I'm getting more subscribers every day, and I really hope that this content and what I put out in the future will really help break down any barriers so you can get started with Shopify app development and join this awesome space. Once again, thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video.